Amelia Hayes stood at the altar, the perfect bride in a perfect wedding. It was a beautiful lie, meticulously crafted to bury a 5-year-old nightmare, the unsolved disappearance of her younger sister. She was about to say, "I do," to the man she believed would finally heal her broken soul, when a small ragged boy burst through the cathedral doors. His voice, though quiet, silenced the entire room when he pointed at the groom and declared, "Don't marry him. He killed your sister." The guests gasped, and the groom began to laugh, dismissing the absurd accusation, until the boy held up a small tarnished locket, and every sound in the grand cathedral died, replaced by a horrifying, bone-chilling silence. This is just the tip of the iceberg. To find out how this impossible story ends, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next. The scent of 1,000 white lilies filled the grand cathedral. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting jewels of light across the faces of the city's elite. This was Amelia Hayes's coronation, not just her wedding day. Every detail was perfect, a fortress of wealth and beauty built to keep the ghosts of the past at bay. As she glided down the aisle, her smile was a masterpiece of deception. Beneath the veil and the diamonds, Amelia was suffocating. 5 years. It had been 5 years since her sister Clara had vanished without a trace. This marriage to Julian Croft, the city's most charismatic real estate mogul, was meant to be the final chapter of that nightmare. A new life, a clean slate. She reached the altar, taking Julian's hand. His smile was warm, reassuring. The priest's voice boomed, "Do you, Amelia, take Julian?" The words hung in the air, a promise of a future she so desperately needed. But before she could answer, the massive oak doors of the cathedral burst open. A small boy, no older than 10, stood silhouetted against the light. He was thin, dressed in ragged clothes, a stark contrast to the opulence around him. He took a few steps forward, his eyes locking onto Amelia's. Then, in a voice that was not loud, but carried an impossible weight, he pointed a trembling finger at the groom. "Don't marry him. He killed your sister." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The organ music died. For a heartbeat, the world stood still, balanced on the edge of a child's horrifying accusation. The fairy tale had just ended, and a waking nightmare was about to begin. For a long moment, the only sound in the cavernous cathedral was the frantic beating of Amelia's own heart. The boy's words seemed to hang in the air, a poisonous vapor that contaminated the sacred space. Whispers erupted like wildfire among the pews, the rustle of silk and the clinking of jewelry suddenly sounding nervous and sharp. Amelia's father, a man whose face was a permanent mask of stoic control, looked as if he'd been struck. She saw his hand tighten on his wife's arm, his knuckles white. Across the aisle, Julian's business associates, men who carved up the city with pens and contracts, exchanged looks of disbelief and predatory curiosity. This was not just an interruption, it was a scandal, blooming in real time at the social event of the year. Then Julian laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle, but a warm, rolling laugh that seemed designed to fill the room and suffocate the tension. He released Amelia's hand, gave it a reassuring squeeze, and turned to face the boy. With the grace of a seasoned politician, he walked down the altar steps, his polished shoes clicking confidently on the marble. The crowd, desperate for a cue, quieted, their eyes fixed on him. He was their conductor, and he was about to restore the symphony. He knelt before Leo, creating a tableau of compassion. One hand rested on the boy's thin shoulder. "Son," he said, his voice laced with a theatrical pity that made Amelia's stomach clench. "You seem lost. Are you hungry? Is there someone we can call for you?" Leo didn't answer. He simply stared at Julian, his gaze unwavering, unnervingly clear. It was like watching a sparrow face down a hawk. Julian, undeterred, rose and addressed his audience. "My friends, my family," he began, his arms spread wide as if to embrace them all. "Please, let us not meet this poor child's confusion with anger. Let us meet it with compassion." He began to pace, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "What we see here is not a monster. It is a symptom of a sickness in our city, a city where children like this are left behind, forgotten, children who are so desperate for a lifeline that they invent stories, create fantasies. He was brilliant. Amelia watched, a horrified spectator at her own wedding, as he masterfully spun the narrative. He was no longer the accused. He was the benevolent philanthropist, the voice of reason. The guests visibly relaxed, their faces softening with pity, their admiration for Julian growing with every word. He had transformed a horrifying accusation into a fundraising speech. "When Amelia and I are married," Julian continued, gesturing back to her, "we pledged to double our contributions to the city's homeless youth shelters. We will not let children like this fall through the cracks." A polite, scattered applause broke out. He had won them over. He had taken Leo's terrible truth and humiliated him with it, painting him as a delusional prop in a grand play of charity. Amelia felt a wave of nausea. She wanted to believe Julian. She needed to. The alternative was a chasm of darkness she wasn't ready to face. Yet, the boy's eyes held no fantasy. They held only a grim, quiet certainty. "Now," Julian said, his tone shifting to one of gentle authority. He nodded to two burly security guards who had been hovering near the doors. "Let's get this young man a hot meal and a warm place to stay. He has had a very difficult day." The guards moved forward, their large frames casting long shadows over the small boy. They were professionals, moving with an efficient lack of emotion. One reached for Leo's arm, and that's when everything changed. Leo didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. As the guard's fingers closed around his bicep, he simply reached into the pocket of his tattered coat. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Every eye was on his small, dirt-smudged hand as it emerged. Clutched in his fingers was a piece of metal, dangling from a broken chain. It was dark with tarnish, but as he held it up, a single beam of sunlight from a high window struck it, and it flashed with a faint, silvery light. It was a locket, a small, heart-shaped silver locket. Julian's smile froze on his face. The benevolent mask cracked, and for a fraction of a second Amelia saw a flicker of pure cold panic in his eyes. Amelia's own breath hitched in her throat. The world around her dissolved into an unfocused blur. There was only the locket, hanging in the air like a pendulum swinging between the past and the present. She knew its weight. She knew the delicate cursive C engraved on its surface. She knew the precise way the clasp had always been a little tricky to open. It was the gift she had given Clara on her 16th birthday. A gift her sister had sworn she would never, ever take off. A gift the police had searched for, dredged rivers for 5 long years. The polite murmurs of the crowd died instantly. The pity, the admiration for Julian, it all evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. The security guards stopped dead in their tracks, their hands hovering uselessly in the air. The faint, impossible whisper of a miracle, or something far more terrible, had just screamed through the cathedral. The boy hadn't spoken another word, but his message was now deafeningly clear. Power had shifted. The small, homeless child, armed with nothing but a forgotten piece of silver, now held the entire room hostage. Amelia took a clumsy step forward, her multi-thousand-dollar dress suddenly feeling like a lead weight. Her voice came out as a broken, strangled whisper, a question that held the power to destroy her entire world. Where did you get that?" Amelia's question shattered the silence, and in its place chaos bloomed. Julian, his face a mask of cold fury, recovered first. The charming philanthropist vanished, replaced by a ruthless executive facing a hostile takeover. "Thief!" he roared, his voice bouncing off. The high stone arches. He pointed a shaking finger at Leo. "He's a thief. He must have stolen it. Guards, get that thing and get him out of my sight. Now!" Spurred by his command, the security guards lunged, but the guests, no longer passive spectators, had surged forward from the pews, driven by a morbid curiosity. They created a bottleneck in the aisle, a wall of expensive suits and silk dresses. In the confusion, Leo twisted out of the guard's grasp. He was small and quick, a creature of the streets accustomed to vanishing in a crowd. He dropped the locket, which skittered across the marble floor with a faint metallic sound that cut through the noise. Before anyone could react, he had slipped through the press of bodies and was gone, vanishing out the heavy cathedral doors like a ghost leaving its own haunting. The wedding was no longer a ceremony, it was the scene of a disaster. Amelia's mother let out a strangled sob and collapsed into her father's arms. The guests were a frantic hive of whispers, the air thick with speculation and scandal. Julian was barking orders, his face flushed, his perfect composure utterly destroyed. He was trying to contain the fire, but the truth, or at least the possibility of it, was already burning the whole event to the ground. Amelia heard none of it. She moved as if in a trance, the world around her muted and distant. She saw only the small silver heart lying on the black and white tiles of the floor. She knelt, her knees cracking, the pristine white silk of her dress pooling in the dust. Her fingers closed around the locket. It was cold, so terribly cold. Clutching it in her palm, she pushed herself up and walked away from the altar, away from Julian, away from the noise. She found a small empty side chapel lit only by a bank of prayer candles. She sank onto a wooden pew, the heavy silence of the small room a stark contrast to the pandemonium outside. Here, alone, she entered the desert. Her mind raced, desperately trying to find a path back to sanity. Julian was right. It had to be the logical explanation. The boy was a thief, a pickpocket. Maybe he'd stolen it from a pawn shop. Maybe he'd found it in a gutter. The police investigation 5 years ago had been exhaustive, but they weren't infallible. They could have missed it. It was possible. It was logical. It was the only version of the story that would allow her to walk out of this chapel, put her veil back on, and marry the man waiting for her. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force the rational thought to take root, but her heart wasn't listening. She opened her hand and stared at the locket. Her thumb traced the engraved C. A memory, sharp and painful, pierced through her confusion. She was in Clara's sunlit bedroom. Clara, 16 and vibrant, was tearing the wrapping paper off the gift. Her gasp of delight, the way she'd thrown her arms around Amelia's neck, her laughter like wind chimes. She had promised. Clara was not careless. She would have sooner lost a finger than that locket. Amelia's thoughts then turned to Julian. She replayed the last few minutes in her mind. Not his words, but his eyes. That fleeting, almost imperceptible moment of cold, raw panic when he first saw the locket. It wasn't the reaction of a man surprised by a thief. It was the reaction of a man seeing a ghost. His subsequent rage, his desperate need to get the boy out of the room. It wasn't about protecting their wedding. It felt like he was trying to silence a witness. The two possibilities warred within her. A world where Julian was innocent and her wedding could be salvaged. A world where he was a monster and she had been sleeping next to her sister's murderer for years. The desert of doubt was a vast, terrifying landscape, and both paths leading out of it led to an agony of their own. A sob escaped her throat, raw and ragged. The truth, that's all that mattered now. The perfect wedding, the perfect life, the perfect man. It was all just sand, and it was slipping through her fingers. The only rock she could hold on to was the cold, hard piece of metal in her hand. Her decision was made. It wasn't even a choice. It was a primal, undeniable need. She had to find him. She had to find that boy. She stood up, her legs shaking, and walked back out into the chaos. She saw Julian arguing with her father. He saw her coming, his expression shifting from anger to a strained look of concern. "Amelia, darling," he began, reaching for her. "We'll sort this out. I've called the head of police. We'll find this street rat and—" "Don't," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She pulled her arm away from his touch. "I need to go." "Go? Go where?" "Amelia, don't be ridiculous. We have 200 guests." But she was already walking away. She ignored her mother's cry, ignored the shocked faces of her friends. At the back of the cathedral, the long, elegant train of her wedding dress caught on a candelabra. Without a second thought, she gathered the delicate fabric in her fists and ripped it, the sound of tearing silk echoing the tearing of her own life. Free, she pushed open the heavy doors and ran out into the harsh afternoon sun. The fairy tale was over, the white dress now a costume in a nightmare. Amelia was no longer a bride. She was a hunter, searching through the cold, indifferent city for the one child who held the key to her sister's ghost. The city was a blur of noise and indifference. Amelia ran until her lungs burned, the remnants of her wedding dress catching on grimy street corners and indifferent passers-by. She was a ghost from another world, her pearl earrings and silken gown a mockery in the gritty reality of the downtown streets. People stared, some pointing, others simply shaking their heads at the sight of another city spectacle. Her questions were met with blank stares or dismissive shrugs. A boy? Lady, there are 1,000 boys. Her desperation mounted with every failed attempt, every street that turned into a dead end. The hope that had propelled her out of the cathedral was beginning to curdle into a familiar, suffocating despair. She finally stumbled into a narrow, graffiti-scarred alleyway, seeking refuge from the prying eyes. The stench of stale garbage and rain-soaked concrete filled the air. She leaned against a cold brick wall, sliding down to the ground in a heap of ruined silk. The locket was still clutched in her hand, its metal now. Warm from her body heat. This was it. She had failed. The boy was gone, and with him the only thread connecting her to the truth. A dry, racking sob escaped her lips, a sound of utter defeat. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." The voice was quiet, coming from the deeper shadows of the alley. Amelia's head snapped up. Leo stepped out from behind a large dumpster, his small frame no longer looking fragile, but filled with a strange, solemn purpose. He hadn't been running from her. He had been waiting. Amelia scrambled to her feet, renewed with a surge of adrenaline. I was looking for you," she stammered, taking a step toward him. "The locket. You have to tell me. Where did you find it? How did you know who I was? Who told you to come to the wedding?" The questions poured out of her, a frantic, jumbled mess. Leo didn't seem intimidated. He just watched her, his expression serious. "Nobody told me to come," he said simply. "The sad girl showed me." Amelia froze. The sad girl? "I see her sometimes," Leo explained, his voice matter-of-fact as if describing the weather. "In my head. She's always cold and crying in the dark. She kept showing me a place, over and over. A place with a broken windmill and a well that's been covered with stone." A cold dread, far colder than the alley air, washed over Amelia. She knew the place. The old Hayes property by the river. It had been their favorite childhood haunt. Clara had called the crumbling stone well her wishing well. She pointed, Leo continued, his own small hand gesturing as if tracing a memory. She pointed to the ground right next to the well. She was sad because no one could find her favorite thing. So I went there. I dug in the dirt with my hands, and it was right there, waiting. The broken windmill, the wishing well, the locket. The pieces were slotting together, forming a picture of such profound horror that Amelia felt her body go numb. But it was the next piece, the final terrible piece. That shattered her completely. It came in the form of a memory, so vivid and visceral it felt like it was happening all over again. She was 24, standing in her father's mahogany-paneled study. Julian, her ambitious new boyfriend, had just made an offer on the old riverside property through his development company. Her father was hesitant. He had said, his voice heavy with sentiment. Amelia, drunk on her new life and desperate to impress Julian, had scoffed. The argument had been short and brutal. She had wielded her father's love for her like a weapon, accusing him of being stuck in the past, of holding them back. She had belittled Clara's attachment to the place, calling it childish. In the end, her father, weary and sad, had conceded. The land was sold. The memory faded, leaving Amelia standing in the filthy alley, the full weight of the truth crashing down upon her. It was a truth far worse than murder. It was the truth of her own complicity, her ambition, her casual cruelty in dismissing her sister's feelings, her selfish need for status and prestige. She hadn't just sold a piece of land, she had sold her sister's sanctuary. She had sold the very ground Julian would use to bury his crime, to entomb Clara forever. She had personally, eagerly, handed her sister's killer the key and walked away, too blinded by her own reflection in his world to see the darkness behind his smile. The quest for a monster had led her to a mirror, and in it, her own face stared, back, stained with guilt. A guttural cry of pure agony was torn from her throat as her knees gave way. She collapsed onto the cold, unforgiving pavement, no longer a bride, no longer an heiress, but simply a sister who had failed in the most absolute way imaginable. The locket fell from her grasp, its faint clatter lost in the sound of her own heart breaking. Leo stood over her, his expression unchanged. He did not offer comfort, he offered purpose. "She's trapped there," he said, his voice cutting through her grief. "She can't be free until you bring them to her. You're the only one who can." The grimy alley floor was a bed of nails, and Amelia lay on it, a broken doll of silk and pearls. The past was a murderer, the future a void, and the present was this suffocating agony of guilt. Her power, her name, her money. It had all been an elaborate costume, and it had just been torn from her, leaving her naked and shivering in the ruins of her own life. Leo's words weren't an accusation. They were a sentence. A life sentence of a duty she felt too weak to even comprehend, let alone carry out. She was paralyzed, pinned to the ground by the sheer weight of her own sin. She didn't know how long she lay there, her sobs eventually quieting into shuddering, silent breaths. The sounds of the city seemed to grow louder, more menacing. She felt a small, hesitant touch on her shoulder. She looked up to see Leo standing over her, holding his own jacket, a thin, threadbare thing that offered little protection from the elements. He didn't say a word. He simply draped it over her bare shoulders. The gesture was so small, so simple, yet it struck her with the force of a physical blow. All her life, she had been wrapped in cashmere and couture, protected by wealth and status. But none of it had ever felt as warm, as profoundly comforting as this child's ragged jacket. It was an act of pure, unadorned humanity. In that moment, he had everything, and she had nothing. "We have to go," Leo said, his voice soft but firm. "His men will be looking for you, for us." The thought of Julian, of his guards, sent a fresh jolt of fear through her. She had nowhere to go. Her home was a lie, her family a part of the facade. She had no sanctuary. Leo seemed to understand. He extended a small, dirty hand. "I know a place," he said. "You'll be safe." Hesitantly, she took his hand. His skin was calloused, but his grip was steady. He led her out of the alley and into a labyrinth of back streets she never knew existed. They moved through the city's forgotten veins, a world away from the grand avenues she called home. Finally, he pushed aside a loose sheet of corrugated metal, revealing a dark opening. Inside was an abandoned warehouse, but it wasn't empty. A small community had taken root in the cavernous space. A fire burned brightly in a steel drum, casting flickering shadows on makeshift shelters built from pallets and tarps. A dozen faces turned to look at. Them, weathered, tired faces that held no judgment, only a weary curiosity. Amelia, in her torn and dirt-stained wedding dress, must have been a shocking sight, but no one gasped or pointed. They simply watched as Leo led her toward the fire. An older woman with kind eyes and a face like a wrinkled map handed Amelia a tin mug of steaming water. A man wordlessly offered her a piece of bread. These people, who had less than nothing, were offering her their warmth, their food, their safety. Her money was worthless here. Her name, which could open any door in the city, meant nothing. Here she was just a soul in pain, and they treated her with a quiet dignity she had never truly understood. The power of her old world had vanished completely. She sat on an upturned crate, the ragged jacket over her shoulders, and finally told Leo everything. The words tumbled out. Her ambition, her jealousy of Clara's simple happiness, the argument with her father, the years of willful ignorance. She confessed it all to this 10-year-old boy under the watchful eyes of the city's forgotten, using the firelight as her confessional. When she finished, her voice raw, she expected him to recoil. She expected him to hate her. Instead, Leo looked into the fire for a long moment before speaking. "Being sad about what you did won't help her now," he said, his wisdom ancient and absolute. "My grandmother used to say that crying doesn't fix a broken pot. It just makes the clay wet. Only action can put the pieces back together." He turned his piercing gaze on her. "So what will you do now?" The question was not an absolution. It was a challenge. It was a handing off of a sacred responsibility. He wasn't there to forgive her. He was there to show her the path to earning her own redemption. In that moment, the inversion was complete. The powerful heiress was a lost and broken student. The homeless child was her stoic, unyielding guide. He was not offering her comfort. He was offering her a chance to be worthy of her sister's memory. Amelia looked down at her hands, no longer adorned with flawless diamonds, but covered in the grime of the city. She thought of Clara, cold and alone in the dark earth. Leo was right. Her tears were useless. Her guilt was a luxury she could no longer afford. Action. That was the only thing left. She looked up, meeting his gaze, her own eyes finally clear of the fog of grief and filled with a new, terrifying resolve. The first piece she had to put back. Together was the truth. "I'm going to the police," she whispered, the words tasting like ash and iron. "I'm going to tell them everything." With Leo's challenging words echoing in her soul, Amelia walked out of the warehouse and back into a world that no longer recognized her. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the city. Her resolve was a fragile flame, and her destination was the only place she could think of to shelter it: the Central Police Precinct. Each step was an act of war against the life she had known. She was no longer just running from Julian, she was actively moving to dismantle him, and by extension, herself. The torn dress was no longer a symbol of ruin, but of rebirth. It was the uniform of her new, terrifying purpose. The imposing stone facade of the police headquarters loomed ahead. She could see the blue and white cars, the officers coming and going. She was steps away from the threshold, from making this nightmare irrevocably real, when a long black sedan slid silently to the curb, blocking her path. The tinted rear window lowered, and she found herself staring into the weary, defeated eyes of her own father. "Amelia," he said, his voice strained, "get in the car, please." It wasn't a request. It was a plea from a broken man. There was no escape. Julian had anticipated her move. She wasn't taken to her family home or a police station, but to a place far more sterile and intimidating, the top-floor conference room of a prestigious law firm. The room was a glass box, offering a panoramic view of the glittering city skyline, a world she no longer belonged to. Julian was waiting for her, standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The charming groom was gone. In his place was a predator, calm, confident, and in complete control of the environment. Her father and a team of stone-faced lawyers were his silent audience. This wasn't an intervention. It was an ambush. "I'm impressed, Amelia," Julian began, his voice smooth as silk but cold as the glass around them. "I didn't think you had it in you. Running through the streets, making a scene, it was very dramatic." He took a sip of his drink. "But now, the drama is over. It's time for us to be logical." He gestured to a large mahogany table where a single thick file folder sat. "You have a story," he said. The word of a delusional, homeless child and a tarnished piece of jewelry that could have come from anywhere. I, on the other hand, have facts. He tapped the folder. "I have the power to protect this family or to utterly destroy it, and right now that choice rests entirely with you." This was the crossroads. Julian, with the help of his lawyers, laid out her two paths with chilling precision. The first path was silence. She would release a statement claiming a temporary mental breakdown due to wedding stress. She would go away for a while, and the scandal would be managed. In return, Julian would not only protect the Hayes family name but elevate it. Their businesses would merge, their power would grow. He was offering her a golden cage, a return to the lie, polished and reinforced with steel. The second path was war. If she persisted with her fantasy, he would open the folder on the table. He gave her a preview of its contents. He spoke of her father's questionable business deals from a decade ago, deals that were not illegal but would be ruinous in the court of public opinion. He mentioned her mother's secret struggles with prescription medication, with medical records he had somehow obtained. He even had evidence of Amelia's own profligate spending, framing her as an unstable and spoiled heiress. He would paint her as a vindictive, scorned woman, and Leo as her pawn. "Think very carefully, Amelia," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Is getting your justice for Clara worth bankrupting your father, humiliating your mother, dragging the name they spent their entire lives building through the filth? They have already lost one daughter. Do you really want to be the one who makes them lose everything else?" The weight of his threat was suffocating. She looked at her father, who sat slumped in his chair, a prisoner in his own expensive suit. All her life she had been his princess, the jewel of his empire. Her duty had always been to shine, to uphold the family name. That conditioning, that deep-seated instinct to protect her own, screamed at her to take the deal. It was the logical choice, the sane choice. But then she thought of Leo's simple, powerful words. She thought of Clara's laughter, of her promise to never take off the locket. What was a family name worth if it was built on the foundation of a child's forgotten grave? What was wealth worth if it was used to purchase silence and bury the truth? It was all just dust. She felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was gone, burned away by the fire of her guilt, and a new, unshakable clarity. She had been standing at this crossroads her entire life, the choice between superficial success and difficult truths, and had always chosen wrong. Not this time. She looked directly at Julian, her gaze steady and clear. "You're wrong," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute finality in the silent room. "You can't destroy my family's name. It's already destroyed. It was destroyed the moment you murdered my sister, and it was shattered when my own ambition helped you hide." Her, she took a step toward him. "So you can release that file. You can tell your lies. It doesn't matter anymore. There's nothing left for you to take from me." Julian's face tightened with rage, but a flicker of surprise showed in his eyes. He had expected tears, hysteria, a negotiation. He had not expected this. He had not expected a ghost. Amelia turned and walked toward the door, her father too stunned to stop her. She knew going to the police was no longer the right first step. Julian would bury them in legal maneuvers and character assassination. He drew his power from his public image as a flawless city icon. To defeat him, she had to fight him on her own terms, in her own arena. She glanced at a large television screen on the conference room wall, currently showing a news anchor discussing the bizarre cancellation of the Hayes-Croft wedding. She stopped, her hand on the doorknob, and looked back at him one last time. "You're right about one thing, Julian. Right now, here's my word against yours, so I'm going to make sure the whole world hears my word." Amelia did not go home. She did not seek shelter with her powerful friends. She walked away from the law firm's glass tower with a singular, terrifying clarity. Julian had shown her his battlefield, the courts, the media, the back rooms where reputations were bought and sold. He had shown her his weapons, lies, blackmail, and manipulation. She knew then she could never win on his terms, so she would choose her own. She would fight him not in the shadows, but in the blinding, unforgiving light of day. Using a payphone, a relic from a world she barely knew, she made a single call, not to the police, but to a reporter, a notoriously stubborn journalist named Iris Vance, a woman who had a reputation for valuing a true story over a comfortable one. Amelia gave her the time and the place, noon the next day, on the steps of the very cathedral where she was supposed to have been married. Then she disappeared back, into the city's anonymous embrace, spending the night in the warehouse, a silent guest among the forgotten, steeling herself for the battle to come. By 11 the next morning, the cathedral square was a circus. News vans bristled with antennas, their satellite dishes aimed at the sky like weapons. A thicket of microphones and cameras was arranged at the bottom of the stone steps. A crowd of reporters, online bloggers, and morbidly curious onlookers buzzed with speculation. Julian's PR machine had been working overnight, seeding the media with whispers of Amelia's emotional instability and a history of erratic behavior. He was building a narrative, preparing to frame whatever she said as the ravings of a woman scorned. At precisely noon, a hush fell over the crowd. Amelia appeared at the top of the steps. She was alone. She still wore the wedding dress, now deeply soiled and torn, a shocking and powerful statement. Her hair was unkempt, her face was pale and free of makeup, but her eyes held a fire that no one had ever seen in them before. She looked not like a victim, but like a warrior arriving at her own execution with her head held high. She walked slowly down the steps and stood before the wall of microphones. This was her podium. This was her altar. "My name is Amelia Hayes," she began, her voice steady, amplified by the microphones to carry across the entire square. "Yesterday, this was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I am here to tell you why it wasn't. I am here to tell you the truth." She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the faces and cameras. "The truth is that 5 years ago, my sister, Clara Hayes, was murdered by the man I was supposed to marry, Julian Croft." An explosion of noise erupted from the press, shouted questions, camera shutters firing like machine guns. Amelia waited for it to subside, her calm a stark contrast to the frenzy she had unleashed. But the real sacrifice, the true purpose of her being there, was yet to come. "But that is not the most important reason I am here today," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the crowd into a conspiratorial silence. "I am not here to simply play the role of the victim, because in this story, my hands are not clean. Another wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the square. "Julian Croft could not have succeeded without my help," she said, her voice clear and filled with self-recrimination. "My ambition blinded me. My desire for a certain kind of life, for status and prestige, made me deaf to my own family. I am the one who convinced my father to sell a piece of land that my sister loved, a sanctuary from her childhood. I dismissed her feelings as childish and pushed the sale through because it benefited my relationship with Julian. It was on that land, the land I sold him, that he buried my sister. She was destroying herself publicly. With every word, she was tearing down the flawless image she had spent her entire life building. This was the antidote to her sin. She was sacrificing her reputation, her family's honor, her entire identity, live, for the entire world to see. For 5 years I helped him keep his secret," she confessed, tears now streaming down her face, but her voice never wavering. "Not with knowledge, but with willful ignorance, with a selfishness that allowed me to build a life of happiness on the foundations of my sister's grave. I am not just asking for justice for Clara. I am asking for forgiveness for my own part in her story." Then, for her final act, she reached into the pocket of the ragged jacket Leo had given her, which she still wore over her dress. She pulled out the tarnished locket. "He made one mistake," she said, holding it up for the cameras to capture. "He left this behind, Clara's locket. I am asking the chief of police to send a forensics team to the old Hayes property by the river. I am asking them to look inside the old stone well near the broken windmill." She let the locket fall, its chain dangling from her fingers. The press was silent now, utterly captivated. In that moment, as she stood there, exposed and broken, Amelia felt a profound and inexplicable peace settle over her. The weight that had been crushing her chest for 5 years was gone. By sacrificing everything she thought she was, she had finally liberated herself from the prison of her own guilt. She was free. Before the last camera flash had faded, she saw 2 grim-faced detectives pushing their way through the throng of reporters, their eyes locked on her. The hunt was no longer hers alone. The city had finally woken up to her sister's ghost. The storm Amelia had unleashed was immediate and absolute. As the detectives led her gently through the frenzied media circus to an unmarked car, she felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. The shouts of the reporters, the blinding camera flashes, the sheer chaos of it all. It felt distant, muffled. The only thing that felt real was the quiet hum of the car engine as it pulled away, leaving her old world behind in a blaze of public glory and private ruin. At the police precinct, in a small, quiet, windowless room, the healing began. There were no accusations, no harsh lights, just a female detective with tired, kind eyes who listened patiently as Amelia recounted the entire story, from the day Clara disappeared to the moment Leo had appeared in the cathedral. For the first time, she wasn't speaking as a suspect or a socialite, but simply as a sister. The words, once so heavy with guilt, now felt light, cleansed by her public confession. As she spoke, a city-wide machine of justice, directly powered by her sacrifice, roared to life. News helicopters swarmed the sky over the old Hayes property, their cameras broadcasting live footage to a captivated city. Squad cars and forensic vans streamed down the once-forgotten country lane, their flashing lights cutting through the twilight. Under the glare of portable floodlights, a team of officers and forensic specialists began the grim work of unsealing the old stone well. They worked with a solemn, focused intensity, a stark contrast to the media frenzy unfolding just beyond the police tape. Simultaneously, another team, this one clad in tactical gear, descended upon the gleaming glass tower of Croft Enterprises. They moved with silent, swift efficiency through the opulent marble lobby, their presence a shocking intrusion into a world of wealth and power. They found Julian in his penthouse office, the same one from which he had issued his threats. He was on the phone with his legal team, his voice filled with rage, attempting to spin a counter-narrative of Amelia's insanity. He was so engrossed in the fight for his reputation that he didn't see them coming until the door burst open. The man who controlled skylines and blackmailed families could only stare in disbelief as the officers swarmed. In the power he had cultivated his entire life, evaporated in the face of a search warrant and the undeniable truth. The clink of handcuffs being fastened around his wrists was the only sound in the vast, silent office. As they led him away, his perfect suit now disheveled, his face a mask of impotent fury, he was no longer a king in his castle. He was just a common murderer, his empire crumbling around him. Back at the precinct, the kind detective placed a cup of tea in Amelia's hands. And then the call came. The detective answered, listened for a moment, and her expression softened with a sad, profound respect. She hung up and turned to Amelia. "They found her," she said gently. "It's over, Amelia. She's been found." The word struck Amelia not with a crash, but with a quiet, resonant finality. It was the end of the sentence she had been waiting 5 years to hear. The tears that came were not the hot, agonized tears of guilt from the alleyway, but slow, silent tears of grief and release. It felt as if a tightly coiled spring inside her soul, wound to the breaking point for half a decade, had finally, gently, unwound. The ghost of uncertainty, the torment of, was gone. Clara was no longer lost in the darkness. She was found. She could come home. This was the cure. This was the healing of the wound that had festered in her family's heart for so long. Later that night, her father came to the station. He looked 10 years older, the weight of the day having settled deep into his bones. But as he looked at Amelia, there was no anger in his eyes, no disappointment over their ruined name. There was only a shared, bottomless grief. He sat beside her and took her hand, his grip frail but firm. "You did the right thing," he whispered, his own voice thick with unshed tears. "You brought our little girl home." In that moment, the last vestiges of the old world fell away. They were not the powerful Hayes family anymore. They were just a father and a daughter, united in loss and finally in truth. Amelia squeezed his hand, looking past him to the reflection of the city in the darkened glass of the interview room. The ghost that had haunted the Hayes family for 5 years was finally at rest. The only question that remained was what to do with the dawn that follows the longest night. 1 year later, the world was a different place. The name Julian Croft was now a permanent stain in the city's history, a synonym for sociopathic deceit, his life. Sentence a mere footnote in the story that had gripped the nation. The Hayes family name was no longer a symbol of elite power, but of a tragic and profound public reckoning. The trials, both legal and social, had cost them nearly everything. The company was sold off in pieces, the mansion was shuttered, and the vast fortune was reduced to a modest fraction of its former glory. In the eyes of their old world, they had lost. But Amelia knew the truth. They had won. The old Hayes property by the river was no longer a place of darkness. It had been reclaimed, reborn. The broken windmill, once a skeletal silhouette against the sky, now had sails that turned slowly in the breeze. The place where the well had been was now the heart of the property, a beautiful, serene memorial garden filled with white lilies and simple stone benches. And overlooking it all was a new building, warm and inviting, with large windows and a wide, open door. A simple wooden sign hung over the entrance. Clara's. Light. This was Amelia's new dawn. It was not a foundation for glamorous galas or a tax shelter for the wealthy. It was a home, a safe house and community center for the city's forgotten children, the ones like Leo who navigated a world that preferred to look away. Amelia was not its benefactor. She was its heart. She lived in a small apartment on the 2nd floor, and her days were not filled with board meetings and social calendars, but with the chaotic, vibrant, and meaningful work of healing. We see her in the main hall, her sleeves rolled up, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She is laughing, a sound that is now deep and genuine, as she helps a young girl knead dough in the communal kitchen. She is no longer draped in designer labels, but in simple jeans and a worn sweater, and she has never looked more beautiful, more alive. Her power no longer came from a bank account, but from her ability to look a frightened child in the eye and say, "You are safe here." Leo was a fixture at the center, not as a resident but as a leader. The other children gravitated to his quiet strength. He was the keeper of their stories, the defender of the small and the scared. Later that afternoon, Amelia found him sitting in the memorial garden, staring at the simple stone that bore his sister's name. She sat beside him, and for a long time they were silent, a comfortable quiet between two souls bound by a shared, sacred history. "I don't see her anymore," Leo said softly, not looking away from the stone. "The sad girl. She's not sad anymore, she's quiet. Amelia felt a wave of peace wash over her. I know, she said, a gentle smile on her face. I can feel it too. She looked at this incredible child who had walked through fire and emerged with his spirit intact. Thank you, Leo. Not just for what you did for Clara, but for what you did for me. You showed me what was real. Leo finally turned to her, a rare small smile on his own lips. You just forgot for a while, he said. Clara helped you remember. Her parents were there too. Her father, free from the crushing weight of his corporate empire, spent his afternoons in the workshop, teaching the older boys woodworking, his hands, once used for signing contracts, now finding purpose in creating and repairing. Her mother, having found a cause greater than her own anxieties, tended to the gardens, her quiet care helping both the flowers and the children to bloom. The tragedy had not just been an ending. It had been a violent, painful, and necessary beginning for them all. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the property, Amelia stood on the porch, looking out at her new kingdom. It was a kingdom of patched-up knees, of second chances, of shared meals and quiet victories. She saw Leo teaching a younger child how to skip stones on the river. She saw her father showing off a newly built birdhouse. She saw her mother walking through the lily garden with a little girl, holding her hand. She had lost a world of glittering illusion, of hollow prestige and gnawing guilt, and in its place she had found this, a life of purpose, a family made whole not by wealth, but by love, a profound and lasting peace. She was no longer a princess in a broken castle. She was the keeper of a lighthouse, a beacon for those lost in the storm, and for the first time in her life, Amelia Hayes felt truly, completely rich. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more exciting videos like this one. Leave a like to support us and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything new. This helps us continue creating the best for you. See you in the next video.